right, good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here tonight. I appreciate it. My name is Farrah Prudence. Thank you for the introduction, Ron. First and foremost, I want to give some thanks before I start. So my first thanks goes to Jesus Christ. And as you can not see yet, but you will see here shortly when this projector gets going, if you have any allergies to the word Jesus, I suggest you take your EpiPen and take it out now and get it ready, okay? Because it's gonna flare up. So my first thanks is to my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, who found me worthy of his death and his resurrection and his grace and covered me in it. I'd like to thank the people who have done tremendous work putting this event on. Miss Margaret right back there, she did a great job. And I want to thank all of you for coming, because apparently right now in America, to show up to an event, even if you don't agree with it, just to hear the other point of view is a problem. You're officially in the hateful, where's your little thing? You're officially in the hate bigotry section right now of the country, just to come and listen to somebody else's story. And last but not least, I want to thank my husband for allowing me to be here. That's him. And I'm very proud to say thank you. Yeah, a lot of people get real testy because I say he allows me to be here. And the truth is he does. Because if it wasn't for him working hard to support our family, and if it wasn't for him pushing me to listen to God and to obey even through the shadow of the valley of death, I wouldn't be here today. Well, all right, let me see. Do I need to start this somehow? Oh, it's gonna turn off. All right, here, I'm gonna give you that. It's about to turn off the projector. That's okay. You can figure it out. Okay, good. You haven't. Okay. Is anybody techie? All right. Well, I'm going to start telling you guys my story, and hopefully my slides can come up here and help you out. 2 Corinthians 6, chapter 6, verse 14. Do not be yoked together with the unbelievers, for what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? Or what fellowship can light have with darkness? In order for me to be able to share my testimony with you, and for me to be able to tell you my story, I have to start with telling you the story of my mother, because the choices that she had made have shaped the way my life has turned out. My mother was from the Middle East. She's from Bethlehem, and she was raised as Rum Orthodox Christian. Now, how many of you actually know what Rum Orthodox is? Anybody? No? Okay, that's usually the case. Don't feel bad. It's actually a church that was started by St. Peter and St. Paul. It's one of the earliest churches around, so you'd think it would be pretty well known. Unfortunately, they were actually almost exterminated by the first invasion of the Holy Land by the Muslim forces shortly after Muhammad died. My dad is from Hebron in Israel, so both of my parents are from there, but my dad is Palestinian, so is my mother. And my dad, born and raised in a very, very relaxed, very loosely Muslim family. They're what is called Muslim by name. They inherited their Islam. They're not religious at all. And both of their families actually did not agree to the marriage, so they eloped in California and got married there, once at a church and once at a mosque. Very romantic story. A lot of you who have actually gotten the book, Frozen Tears, she's a published autobiographer. It's a story about her life. And the agreement was that the children would be raised in both religions, okay? That they'd celebrate Christmas and they'd celebrate Ramadan all at the same time. and it would all be coexist in harmony. Well, my mom was pregnant with their third child, who's my second sister, and at that time, my dad took her, my dad gave her a choice. All right, you can convert to Islam, or I will take the kids to the Middle East and leave you here. Well, you can sit there, and I've sat there and said, well, how could she possibly fall for this nonsense? I mean, we have laws here in America. She should know better. But the truth is, they were together for about 5 years at this point. They were married. And at this point, she was already isolated from her family. She's already isolated from anybody who's not within the Muslim community. So those were her only people that she was allowed to talk to. And by this point, all the crosses in the house have come down. There's no more Bible in the house. There was no more praying in the house. And that was slowly by slowly chipped away at. Well, 9 months pregnant, big pregnant, my mom agreed to go down to a mosque in Orlando, Florida, and to actually convert to Islam. And usually what happens is you go into the mosque and you say the Shahada. Is everybody familiar with the Shahada? No God but Allah, and there's no prophet but Muhammad. These are the words. You say them, you become a Muslim. Well, that's not what happened. When the sheikh, the imam, the kind of like the pastor, came up to them, he knew who my mother was because my dad had already called him, and he took my mother to the front. So a mosque is segregated. The men can be in the front, and the women are not usually allowed in the front rooms. The women are behind, either behind another wall or behind the men. Well, in this situation, the women were in a different room. And the imam came and took my mom in front of the men. And my mom says there was over 200 men at that time in that mosque, so it was pretty intimidating. And instead of asking her to say the Shahada, he says, do you deny Jesus the Christ? Now, how many Christians do you have in the room? Okay, so just about everybody knows, or should know, what the weight of that is, to deny Christ. And she said she was shocked, and she talks about it in the book. She couldn't even say anything, because this wasn't in the program. This was not supposed to happen. And then he asked her again, and says, do you deny Jesus the Christ? And she didn't say anything. And last time, he banged on the table and said, do you deny the Christ? And she said, yes. And she started sobbing. Well, that's the moment for me, looking back, that my mother officially took us out of grace. Unfortunately, my dad took us to the Middle East after that anyways, after my brother was also born here. So she had 4 kids before we moved to Jordan. Does everybody know where Jordan is? It's right next to Israel. They share the River Jordan together. Awesome. Yeah, I lived there for 6 years. That's where my dad grew up, even though he's from Hebron. And I moved there, well, I was moved there when I was 6 years old. And to say that it was a culture shock is actually an understatement, because not only did I go to a place where the food was different, the weather is different, people dress differently, but I also went to a place where my voice as a person was snuffed out. I was no longer considered a full human being. In Jordan, my dad's family lived there, and so did my mother's. Some of my mother's family lived there as well. They lived in a place called Salt City, and this city is a very, very old Christian town. It's actually really cool if you ever get a chance to be there. But growing up there, I had to endure a lot of things that I would not have had I had the privilege of growing up in the United States. One of the things is that my father's abuse actually escalated from the emotional, psychological abuse he was giving my mother, which is your normal brand of domestic violence. Not that I'm normalizing domestic violence, but you meet one man who is a perpetrator, you pretty much met them all. It escalated from that to physical violence, not just against my mother, but against the children. And then it was, of course, spiritual spiritual abuse because she was not even allowed to say that she ever was a Christian. So that got completely wiped out from her identity. She actually had a cross tattoo on her wrist, which is why I got this before I was even a believer, and they took it off with acid. Yeah. So it was completely wiping out who she was, and at the same time, we were stopped from ever knowing it. But maybe even worse than that, my dad's brother and my dad's uncle both felt like myself and one of my sisters at least were kind of free to them. So they helped themselves in whatever they wanted. And so unfortunately we endured a lot of sexual molestation and rape for years. And when I told my dad about what was going on in intimate detail as an 8 or 9 year old, he said, okay. And nothing happened. Nothing ever changed. My uncle continued to come to the house like nothing was a problem. My mother was beaten several times, almost brought to the brink of death for trying to fight against just having my uncle come to the house. That's all she asked. She said, I don't want a big scandal. I don't want a big problem. I just don't want him by the kids. It's not really a lot to ask, but that didn't happen. One of the things that my dad talked about a lot was he called us very special names. Children of pigs, you came from a filthy womb, and I never understood those things. And just to tell you, my dad is not just a moderate Muslim, he's non-practicing Muslim at all, but he was also a millionaire, okay? My dad had the amazing immigrant story. I came to the United States with $20 in my pocket. 7 years later, he left literally a millionaire. He started out pumping gas into people's cars and then bought half of that gas station, then bought the whole gas station, then bought another gas station, I think, then sold that one and bought a big supermarket. He actually named it Farrah's Rainbow Market. And he was a millionaire. Of course, Social Security fraud and food stamp fraud also went with that. But he was here on a visa and he decided to stay, so he broke that law. So you can't be surprised when they break the other laws. Anyways, moving on. When I was about 10 years old, I really was seeking the approval of my father, just like any other 10-year-old, right? We're still in that age where you have unconditional love for your parents. And I decided that I was going to get his approval, that I was not going to get called those names anymore, that he was going to love me, and I was going to be just like my cousins who are loved by their parents, and it is going to be fantastic. I had a great plan. See, the only way to be loved and respected as a Muslim girl or a Muslim woman is to become a devout Muslim. This is the only way. Only guaranteed way, anyways. And so I started to wear the hijab as a 10-year-old. In a family where nobody wore the hijab. Okay, my aunts always did their hair, had full makeup on, wore almost just about whatever they wanted. And I started to read the Quran for myself. You know, I wanted to do it cover to cover. And then I started to study 2 other books, the Hadith and the Seerah. So before I start telling you what I learned, I just want to preface it with something. The Quran is not like the Bible. I know that term is used a lot. The Bible, we believe, or at least the New Testament, is inspired by God. Okay? The Quran, Muslims believe, is word for word, in Arabic, what Allah told Muhammad. It is not up for misinterpretation. It's not up for any kind of mistranslation. It is not negotiable. Allah says in the Quran that the Quran is forever. It is never to be changed. It is for every time, it is for every place. Oh, yay, thank you. All right. So, as I started to study the Quran, I started to study also the Seerah. The Seerah simply means the life of Muhammad, all right? And then there's the Hadith. The Hadith is everything that Muhammad or his close companions and wives have said. Why, this is actually considered the Holy Trilogy in Islam, okay? And why is it so important to Muslims that they document as much about Muhammad as possible? Well, because in the Quran, Muslims are commanded 91 times to obey Muhammad and to do in his example. Okay, so to them, he is the perfect man. He is who they should follow 100% of the time in all situations. We know so much information about Muhammad, it's actually repulsing, because there's intimate information of what happened with his wives. You start reading it and you go, how did this come up in conversation? Why would you tell somebody about this? It's a little creepy, but I'll leave that to you to decide. But once I started reading this and learning about it, I literally got physically ill, because I was brought up to believe that Islam salam, Islam is peace. I'm sure a lot of you have heard that phrase too. The other part of the phrase they usually don't hear is what I grew up hearing, and one day the banner of Islam will fly over the White House. I was 6 years old the first time I heard that phrase. All right, that's me as a kid. Well, fine. Aww. All right, Quran chapter 4, verse 34. Every reference that I have here is out of an Islamic website, okay? I did not translate these myself. I only go to verified Islamic websites. The Quran is from Quran.com, Quran. Be very careful when you're reading it, because the translations are rolled in sugar and dipped in maple syrup, okay? And then the hadith that I use is Bukhari and Muslim. Those are the two hadiths that are agreed upon by all four schools of Sunni Islam all around the world. Sunni Islam makes up more than 85% of Muslims around the world, to be absolute 100% reliable scripture. Okay, there's no arguing with these. And then Sirah, I use Ibn Ishaq, that's the most reliable Sirah. All right, 434. Men are in charge of women by what Allah has given one over the other and what they spend from their wealth. Lesson number 1, ladies, men are in charge of you. So righteous women are devoutly obedient, guarding in their husband's absence what Allah would have them guard. But those wives from whom, okay, notice everything that's in these little brackets is added by the people who are translating this, okay? So the actual Quran says, but those from whom you fear arrogance, they added wives, but it's actually any women, your daughters, your mothers, your sisters. It does not specify wives. From whom you fear arrogance, first advise them, then if they persist, forsake them in bed, and finally strike them. But if they obey you, seek no means against them. Indeed, Allah is ever exalted and grand. I'm not here to tell you what to believe. I'm here to show you what I learned. You can draw your own conclusions. Because unlike other people in this world, I believe in the intelligence and the virtue and the moral standards of the American people. And I believe that you can make your own conclusions for yourself. But I'm going to point out some facts to you. Over here, not only does it say that you can beat your wife, but it says you can beat her because you fear arrogance from her. Not because she's already been arrogant to you. And arrogance is any kind of disobedient or something that you deem unworthy of yourself. So if a man even suspects that his wife is about to be flippant with him, he could beat her. And notice what it says. If she obeys you once more, then seek no means against her. Which means that if she refuses to obey you, what's the conclusion? Keep beating her. And this is, ladies and gentlemen, how you get honor violence and honor killings in America and around the world. Quran chapter 33, verse 59. O Prophet, tell your wives and your daughters and the women of the believers to bring down over themselves part of their outer garments that is more suitable, that they will be known and not be abused. And ever is Allah forgiving and merciful. When people tell you that the hijab is the same as a nun and what she wears and it's all for modesty, ask them about this verse. Well, if a woman's not bringing her garment up on her, that's what it's saying. It's saying cover up. This is one of the verses about the hijab. Why would she be abused? That's because the hijab is not a way for a woman to show her modesty. See, that's another question that people usually ask me. How come a woman who's supposed to show modesty by wearing the hijab can wear tight jeans, full makeup, and really tight tops? Yes, that's because it's not about modesty. It's about, now, the Islamic scholars do push for modest dresses for women. They do push for that, but it's not about modesty. It's about Muslim women distinguishing themselves from non-Muslim women. Why? So that Muslim men know who they are allowed to harass and who they are not allowed to harass and rape. Muslim women, they are not allowed to be harassed or raped or molested by Muslim men. They're not allowed to do that. Non-Muslim women are another story. Quran chapter 2 verse 282. And bring to witness 2 witnesses from among your men. And if there are not 2 men, then a man and 2 women from those whom you accept as witnesses. This verse is so packed. So the first lesson we learned here is that a woman's testimony is half that of a man. All right, so if I went to, and I've asked my dad, and he's never given me an answer as to why he didn't do anything about what my uncle was doing. At the very least, why he didn't stop him from coming to the house, But I think in my head, I think that this might be one of the reasons. Had my dad actually taken me to a judge, first of all, it would cause a huge scandal. It would completely take away the honor of the family. And honor is a concept that is not the same as what we have here in America. The honor, it's been said that the honor of Muslim men lies between the legs of their women. Okay, that's why they have to control the women so much. If I went up to an imam or a sheikh or an Islamic judge and I said, as a 10-year-old, okay, not this woman standing behind you, in front of you, I said, my uncle molested me. Obviously, they'll test me. They'll see that I'm not a virgin anymore. So something happened. They'll bring my uncle in. They'll say, did you do that? Now, if he is found guilty of that, he does get 100 lashes, I believe, in Islamic law. But if he says no, which most likely, he's probably going to say no. If he says no, then I get tried for adultery at 10 years old. And I could very well die. Because I'd be killed. Oh, let's go back to the other one. Lesson number 2. From those whom you accept as witnesses. Have any of you heard of the word dhimmi? Ding ding. Thank you. The word dhimmi is the status of what a human being who is a Jew or a Christian gets demoted to once Islamic rule takes over. This is what they want to do to people in Minnesota. That's you guys. Okay, they want to turn you into dhimmis. Dhimmis are people that once the fighting is done and Islam rules the land, they're the people that are allowed to stay and live there. You only get this privilege if you're a Christian or a Jew. Okay, this privilege is not extended to you if you're an atheist or a Buddhist or a Hindu or anything else. You get killed automatically. Now, what happens to you when you're a dhimmi? You lose human rights. You have to pay a special tax called the jizya to them. Okay? You also cannot bear witness against a Muslim. That's why it says, from those whom you accept as witnesses. Because there are people whose witness is not accepted. That, among other things, if you're really interested in it, there's some great resources. You can go to politicalislam.com with Dr. Bill Warner. He has several books available online, extremely reasonably priced, that you can get. And he talks about dhimmitude. You can just Google the word dhimmitude and it'll come up with a bunch of stuff that you can look into, but there's a lot of laws concerning it. Quran chapter 4 verse 24. And also prohibited to you are all married women except those your right hand possesses. Stop right there. Your right hand possesses. Those are slaves. Muhammad himself had at least 3 sex slaves. Not regular slaves, sex slaves. One of them was called Mary the Copt. She bore his only son. He died as a child. Mary the Copt was gifted to him from Egypt. This is the decree of Allah upon you, and lawful to you are all others beyond these, provided that you seek them in marriage with gifts from your property, desiring chastity, not unlawful sexual intercourse. So for whatever you enjoy of marriage from them, give them their due compensation as an obligation, and there is no blame upon you for what you mutually agree to beyond obligation. Indeed, Allah is ever knowing and wise. It's interesting how some words in Arabic translate, and let me be clear about this, Islamic Arabic, because Arabic was hijacked by Islam. Okay, Arabic is actually a beautiful language. I didn't discover this till after I got out of Islam. Arabic is a gorgeous language and it was hijacked by Islam. The word for marriage in the Quran that's used repeatedly in the Quran is nikah. And nikah doesn't actually mean marriage. It means a sexual contract. This is why it says what has been agreed between you. Give them their due obligation, because there's a dowry. You're paying the woman for this. There are two types of nikah in Sunni Islam, okay? There is the regular kind, which looks like marriage, where the wife lives with the man. There is an amount that is agreed upon of money that in the event he divorces her or she wants a divorce, she is entitled to that money. And they live together, they can have kids, but they're not expected to really stay together. You can get a divorce, it's not frowned upon. Now, a very good chunk of Muslims do stay together. A very good chunk of Muslims don't have 4 wives, even though they're allowed to have 4 wives. And the reason is finances, because they have to pay their wives. So if they have to get married, they have to pay them. They just don't have that money. So what we're learning from this verse is 1, sex slavery is completely allowed and was practiced by Muhammad, their ultimate role model. 2, there's no such thing as marriage, there's nikah. Nikah is just a sexual contract. The other kind of nikah, sorry, that was the first kind, which looks like marriage. The other kind is basically prostitution. I know, fair said a controversial word. It's an agreement. The man pays the woman money, but she nullifies her rights to be fed by him and to be living with him, okay? So all he has to do is just go there, they can have a relationship, and there are no expectations. This marriage can be terminated at any point, and they don't really owe anything to each other, all right? Other than she can't get married to any other man while she's married to him, but he can have as many of these sex slaves and only 4 wives at the same time. And now this, the second type of marriage, is actually practiced. It is especially practiced by Muslim men who go and travel for studies, or they travel for businesses, or they travel for any other kind. They'll get, some of it sometimes is referred to as zawaj al-mut'a, marriage for entertainment or for pleasure. Sometimes it's called zawaj al-safar, which is marriage for travel. So while he's traveling, of course, he might need to get married like that. So that is actually practiced within the Muslim world. Muhammad himself had 11 wives. Some people in Bukhari and Muslim say 13 at the same time. Quran chapter 65 verse 4, and those who no longer expect menstruation amongst your women, if you doubt, then their period is 3 months. And also for those who have not menstruated. And for those who are pregnant, their term is until they give birth. And whoever fears Allah, He will make for him of his matter ease. This is talking about divorce, okay? So when a Muslim man divorces a woman, she has to wait 3 months before she gets married again. And the reason for that is only to make sure she's not pregnant by her first husband or the husband that she just got a divorce from. Now, I just want you to focus on this in red. It says, and also for those who have not yet menstruated. So if you're divorcing a girl who has not yet hit puberty, that means that you married her before she hit puberty, and she has to wait 3 months to see if she's pregnant, which means you had sexual relations with her prior to her hitting puberty. I like to keep this verse in my pocket for when they say, oh no, you're not allowed to marry children in Islam. Oh really? But Muhammad married a 6-year-old. He was 52. Bukhari, volume 5, book 58, number 236. Khadija was Muhammad's first wife, died 3 years before the Prophet departed to Medina. He stayed there for 2 years or so, and then he married Aisha when she was a girl of 6 years of age, and he consummated that marriage when she was 9 years old. Now, some Muslims will come up and say, oh no, she was actually 18. No. The hadith is in agreement. Okay, this is not the only hadith. There are several hadiths out there that say that. There are hadiths from Aisha's own mouth talking about it. They're in agreement that she was 6 and he consummated when she was 9. and they will say, oh, well, that was how people were back then. Really? Well, I can't get into it right now. I don't have it up here because of the time constrictions. But if you look into it, there's a lot of hadith, Islamic documentation that talks about Muhammad would have relations with Aisha, then take her outside to the playground to play with the other kids. Sorry, if the other kids were all married, they wouldn't be on the playground, would they? There are other hadiths that document Abu Bakr, Aisha's father, pleading with Muhammad to wait because Aisha was too young. Bukhari, volume 7, book 72, hadith 777. And Sahih Muslim, book 2, hadith 64. 5 are the acts quite akin to the fitrah, or 5 are the acts of fitrah: circumcision, shaving the pubes, cutting the nails, plucking the hair under the armpits, and clipping the mustache. I know a lot of people are like, this is too much information. I already warned you. We know everything about Muhammad. Everything about Muhammad. Islam is not a religion. It is a way of life. We know if Muhammad entered a house with the right foot or his left foot. We know if you're supposed to eat with your right hand or your left hand. We know if you're supposed to bathe after you sleep with your wife or wait a little bit and bathe. We know everything. If you live as a Muslim under Islamic Sharia, you have to follow what Muhammad did exactly. So, this is about circumcision. Now, I have to tell you, growing up, I was taught in Islamic schools, okay, that circumcision of males is absolutely 100% fard, which means it's a must. There's no arguing against it. You have to circumcise your boys. All right. However, circumcision of the female is a mustahab. It's a preferred. For anybody who's about to tell me that it's both abuse and it's both the same, it is not. Female genital mutilation or circumcision of females is the equivalent of cutting off the little boy's penis. It is not the equivalent of just taking that little bit of flesh off. You want to argue about circumcision? We can do that. That's okay. I really don't care. But when you take little girls in Michigan into what is supposed to be American health clinics and you cut their clitoris off so that they can no longer experience sexual pleasure, and then some judge in Michigan lets you off the hook, then we have a problem. Women rulers. Quran chapter 33 verse 32, O wives of the Prophet, you are not like any among women. If you fear Allah, then do not be soft in speech, lest he in whose heart is disease should covet, but speak with appropriate speech. All right, Muslim women are supposed to look up to the wives of Muhammad. The wives of Muhammad are called the mothers of believers, okay? Now, two things. One, notice how a woman's voice and how she's talking is what's causing the man to covet. No self-control for men. No sense of responsibility for what they covet and what they don't covet. No, you woman, control your mouth and control your, actually, that's been told by me, but not Muslim people. Control your mouth. But when I went into the explanation of this, when I went into what the imams and the sheikhs are explaining this as, they're saying that, oh, women are allowed to talk in front of men. Well, thank you. Appreciate that. However, only speak when spoken to. Do not say too many words that are not needed. Only say what is absolutely needed. And don't speak softly in a flirtatious voice, because then they might covet you. And then if they rape you, it's on you, not them. The Prophet said, a people who make a woman their ruler will never be successful. That's from Bukhari, volume 9, book 88, hadith 219. The reason this little thing that I don't say and I refuse to say till the day I die is because I copy and paste these straight from Islamic websites. I don't alter them in any way. So how do you feel about Muslims voting in Ilhan Omar now? Okay, let's go over it again. A people who make a woman their ruler will never be successful. What do you think the intention was there? Not the success of Minnesota. Ouchies. Bukhari, volume 9, book 83, hadith 17. Muhammad said, a Muslim who has admitted that there is no God but Allah and that I am his prophet may not be killed except for 3 reasons: as punishment for murder, for adultery, or for apostasy. So at this point, I'm 10 years old, I'm reading this stuff, literally getting sick, and I'm done with Islam. I'm done. I said, I cannot worship this God. I'm not going to die for him. I'm not going to do anything for him. I'm totally disgusted with Muhammad. And if he's the God of the universe, I'm totally okay with going to hell. But I can't really say anything because the automatic judgment on a Muslim who leaves Islam is death. And you inherit your Islamic identity. So if your parents are Muslims, you're a Muslim. Actually, you get it from your dad. If your dad's a Muslim, then you're a Muslim, regardless of what your mother is. All right. So at this point, I took off my hijab, which was not a problem at all, because like I said, my family was completely okay. They were very moderate. They actually laughed at me when I wore it. They said, oh, you'll go through phases. Okay, no problem. I took it off, and we were 12 years old when my dad moved us to the United Arab Emirates. Most of you know it by Dubai. It's put on the news a lot. A lot of Westerners like to go there because it's supposed to be this super cool place. It's supposed to be really moderate and really nice. You should look into the laws and look into who they're putting into prisons over there because it's not so nice when you actually live there. John McCain said, I fell in love with my country when I was a prisoner in someone else's. There's no bigger prison than Islam. You can't escape it. Even coming to the West, you can't escape Islam and the prison they want you in. When I was about 13 years old, two major events happened in my life. One, I didn't know was so major until nowadays. I was actually, I went to my dad with a dream that I had. Because in the Middle East, we're just extremely spiritual people. I mean, if you have a bad dream, you cancel your whole week's plans. You don't leave the house because you had a bad dream. God's trying to warn you against something. And I had a dream about this guy, saw his face, and there was light coming out from behind him and through his face. And this light felt like it was burning in a way, kind of like rubbing alcohol. When you put it on a wound, you know it's good for you, but it's burning. It's that kind of burn. But I remember just violently moving my head, trying to get out of his light, and no matter what I did, I could not escape it. So I was freaked out. Went to my dad the next morning. I said, Dad, this is what happened. My dad looked pretty upset. Okay. And he said, well, you saw Isa. He says, Jesus, the Messiah. And when you see Isa in a dream, that means that you're going to be a doctor. Okay. All right. Whatever. I let it go because he was obviously upset. I wasn't about to push the situation. Once he left, I hit the books. We had dream explaining books, like big ones at the house. I went through them and I couldn't find it anywhere, but I decided to let it go. A little while later, 9/11 happened, and I remember my family calling in, my dad's family, a lot of them live here in the States, and they called in and said, turn on the TV, turn on the TV. We turned it on. Every station that we went to had the towers, had the planes going into the towers. And talk about a punch in the gut. My only hope at this point, if I was ever going to get my life back, was to go back home. Was to go back to the States. I had to finagle my way back home somehow. And I had no doubt in my mind when I saw that, who it was that did it. Now I'm 13 years old, looking at my only hope, being America, being completely torn down by the very people I'm trying to escape. I was gutted. In the background, my dad is dancing. He's screaming, Allahu Akbar, laughing. These are our soldiers. My mom was mortified by the situation. She's trying to get all the kids out of the living room. My dad left to celebrate with his buddies. And I'll never forget the feeling I had in that moment. I went outside to our veranda because we lived in a building. And surely, here comes the cars honking, waving their green flags of Islam. They're giving out candy and kayak. Does anybody know what kayak is? I say that word, nobody ever knows what it is. It's actually really good. So it's like a cookie, kind of, and it's stuffed with dates. It's like a date. Oh yeah. but you have to limit yourself because you'll get really sick. I've been there. Not a good place to be. All right, so they were giving out the candy, they were giving out the sweets in celebration. Once my dad left, my mom and I were sitting in the living room, and I said, Mom, we're gonna have a war. I know my country's gonna go to war, and I wanna be there, and I wanna fight for my people. My mom just kind of brushed me off. It was not a good bonding moment, but she just smiled at me, and we moved on. I was about 14 years old. I was 15 in that picture. And as you can see, I was wearing the hijab again. And that's because my dad went into the living room with my mom and closed the doors. So, like any obedient 14-year-old girl, I was eavesdropping to see what they're talking about. Because it was not very often that they went behind closed doors in a peaceful manner. And I heard my dad tell my mom that I want to take the kids to Canada. I got a visa to Canada. Yeah, talk about your hallelujah chorus. And, but I'm afraid the kids are going to lose their religion. Okay? No problem. The next morning I woke up and Allah had inspired me. I wore the hijab. I wore the black dishdasha, the one that goes over the clothes. Yeah, mind you, I was a very American kid. I mean, I had eyeliner on, I was always wearing makeup, I was always wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and all of a sudden Allah's inspired me to obedience. I was praying 5 times a day, I was fasting days I didn't need to fast. I mean, honestly, couldn't get any better. All of a sudden my dad tells me, he brings us in for a family meeting and says, I got a visa to Canada, I'd like to take you guys there, and just, I'm not sure, I don't want you to lose your religion because of it. I said, oh gosh, okay, I've got to up the ante here. I gotta work this. I know it sounds manipulative, and it was, but I was desperate. I was desperate to get out. So I researched Canada online. Actually, I had to go and see where Canada was on the map because I thought the entire thing was the United States. Yeah. So I researched it, and I found a school that was run by ISNA. That's when you really need to know. The Islamic Society of North America. Ron, I'm sure you're familiar. Yep. These are not the good guys. So this is an Islamic school they run a school in Canada. They run several things. They're into politics also. And so I went to my dad. I said, Dad, I found this Islamic school. It's fantastic. We can do the da'wah. I'm so excited to go to Canada. The da'wah is inviting people to come into Islam. All right. And all of a sudden, has anybody ever played slot machines? I know most of us are Christians, but if you've ever played slot machines and you've seen it when it goes ding, 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 and all the lights light up, he was thrilled. I said, yes, we're going. And we did. We drove from the United Arab Emirates through Saudi Arabia to Jordan. Not a drive you should ever take. I would not recommend it. You know why they're always trying to take our country? Because we've got trees. Honestly, you should see Saudi. Yeah. So we made that, and then from Jordan, we flew on a plane to Amsterdam, and then thanks to Air France, we made it from Amsterdam to Toronto. But something massive happened at this point. Now, mind you, by this point, my mom's had the hijab on. She prayed. She tried everything she could to be an obedient wife and not to get the ever-living beating out of her every so often. But it didn't work. But at this point, my mother did something I have never seen her do before, ever in my life. We were on top of the pond, and there's blue all around us. There's not land to see anywhere. We're between Amsterdam, headed to Toronto. And my mom takes off her hijab, and she tells my dad, I kid you not, like this. She's looking at him, and she goes, I don't pray, I don't fast, I'm done. Yeah. She should have done the mic drop. I was like, oh. And my dad, for the first time, looked around, and he was the one that was helpless. There was nothing he could do. He was no longer in a country that completely supported him. Let me put this in perspective for you. In Islam, in Sunni Islam at least, you're allowed to beat your wife. Obviously, we went through this, but not on the face. You're not allowed to leave bruises or something on the face. My dad had beat my mom on the first day of Ramadan, their holy month. And he left bruises and blood, and my mom said, you know what? I'm gonna go to the sheikh. He's gonna find justice for me because he's not allowed to do this to me. So my mom goes to the sheikh looks at her face, and the sheikh is the equivalent of a pastor, they say, but it's not true because the sheikh and the imam has political jurisdiction, and they can throw people in prison. They can actually give people divorces, get people married. There are several things that they can do. She went to the sheikh was appalled. He was furious. He told his guard to go get her husband. He said, go get him, and if he doesn't want to come, drag him by the ear. My dad shows up, and the sheikh says, how could you do this to your wife on the first day of Ramadan? Have you no fear of Allah? And my dad said, Sheikh, she's a Christian convert and she cursed Allah's name and I lost it. And the sheikh looked at my mother and said, go home with your husband. There's nothing I could do for you. So the tables were turned quite a bit. When she was on that airplane, it still gives me shivers when I talk about it. When she was on that airplane and she took off that hijab, only because we were almost there. We were almost to the point of where we were supposed to have our freedom. But fortunately, we did not get our freedom the minute we got to Canada. When we got to Canada, what we found was not freedom. What we found was a society that is very much into something called diversity and multiculturalism, which has led to us as children, 5 children, going to school with very obvious marks of abuse and violence, and nobody saying a word. And I know some people are going to be sensitive to the next words I use, but I'm brown, so can't touch me. I can say these things. If it was a white, black, or other kind of brown, like Hispanic or other kind of brown people that were not Muslims, that were showing up to school with these marks, they would have been reported to Children's Aid quickly, and it would have been dealt with right there on the spot. But because we were Muslim children, I guess it was okay to sacrifice us to the gods of diversity and multiculturalism. And it was pretty sad because we lived in a very wealthy neighborhood, predominantly Christian, predominantly Scottish, actually. And one day, I had started going to counseling to try and deal with the trauma that I had. And one day, I was in our basement, actually, and I was laying down, and I remember looking up and deciding that I was going to report my dad to Children's Aid. And I said, God of Christ, if you're real, get us out of this in one piece. Because you see, I'd already known about cousins that I had who tried to get out and tried to be disobedient, and you just never hear of them again. Or they make it to Jordan, they never make it back. And I knew there's a real good possibility that we could get killed or that we could get shipped back. I went and I told Children's Aid of what was going on. There's plenty of evidence. They scooped us out of school. They took us to a high security shelter. And from there, we had to go from one shelter to the next. That's when I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that Muslims, whether they be policemen, counselors, I don't care if they work for AT&T, their allegiance is to the Islamic Ummah, okay? The Ummah is the nation of Islam, okay? That's every Muslim all around the world, kind of like every Christian belongs to the kingdom of Christ, all right? But the Islamic Ummah is a real thing. It's an empire that has existed and that they're trying to bring back into existence as we speak. Now, their allegiance is to the Ummah. It is not to the country. It is not to their communities. And with their help, my dad actually was bailed out of jail twice with $10,000, and he was able to find us in every high security shelter we went to. Well, we had to move very, very far away, and we had to be we had to use different names and so that we can have some kind of safety. At that point, when my family was safe, I moved to California, because that's what every cool 17-year-old kid does. And from there, I actually went to Iraq, and I was not in the military. I was a Department of Defense contractor. I was a linguist and a cultural expert. And I worked there from the time for 13 months. I turned 19 and 21 in Iraq, but I was only there for 13 months. And I was truly what you would call a daughter of the world. Now, at this point, I had already dropped out of university twice because my dad was stalking me while I lived in Canada. And my life was based on the world. I was not interested in any God. Sometimes I flirted with the idea of going to church. I did. I kind of went, sang the hymns, just really more for social things. I really don't know why I went. All right, there's always a draw to the church, and I went to just suffice that draw, and I moved on. Actually, right before I went to Iraq, it was Ash Wednesday, and I used to go to this Anglican church that actually recently called the police on my mother. I'll tell you that story. So this Anglican church, they have started to allow Muslims to worship in the basement of the church. So my mother went to talk to the pastor. Just to talk to him, and she said, listen, you cannot have another God worship down there. You can't do this. This is a church. And so he called the police and got her escorted out of the church. That's pretty funny. Yeah, it's sad. Sad but funny. So that was the same church that I went to for to get my ashes on before I went to Iraq. And so anyways, I was a daughter of the world, okay? Whatever my friends were up to, I was up to as well. I had boyfriends, I drank, I smoked, I also had a motorcycle, and I partook in whatever they were partaking in. And one day, I was about 25 or 26 years old, when one of my friends, Amy, came up to me and said, and we were all drinking, having a good time at this point, I also smoked pot, and she said, hey Farrah, have you ever tried cocaine? I said, no. She said, well, do you want some? I've got some. You can have it. And for a second, I really did consider it. I really did. But I said, no, I don't think I want to try it this time. She goes, well, you know what they say, you should always try something once. I said, I don't know, Amy. I think when people say that, they mean more like sushi or bungee jumping. You should try once. I don't think crack cocaine is something somebody should try once. But when she left, of course, I was wasted. Not gonna lie to you. I fell on my face, just crying, sobbing, because I knew that maybe she'll offer it again, maybe somebody else will, maybe I'll say no one more time, but eventually I was gonna take some, because I had said yes to everything else. And I was crying, sobbing, crying out to God, saying, God, if you don't save me, I'm going to die. It's not gonna be pretty. And I passed out. The next morning I woke up and the word seminary was in my ear. It's okay, you can call me schizo, I've been called worse. But I heard this word repeated in my ear over and over. So I went and I Googled it. Turns out it's Bible Thumpers School. I was like, great. Called my mother up. At this point, my mother has been baptized. She is very Christian. She feeds everybody. And she's the last one out of the church. The pastor literally has to kick her out. Okay, it's time to go. All right, have a good Sunday. And I called her up. I said, Mom, I'm going to seminary, right? Very proud of myself. She goes, oh, honey, that's nice, but they won't let you in. I said, what do you mean? Well, you can't go to seminary if you have sex and you drink and you smoke. They're not going to let you in. I was appalled, offended, deeply hurt. I said, what happened to turn the other cheek and accept everybody? Where did that go? She goes, well, you know what? Why don't you commit to actually going to church? Try it out before you try to apply to seminary. You know, go to a church group. I said, I could do that. No problem. Well, I started going to a church group, started going to this church. I went to a church group and I made it very clear what I thought about Christians. And I can tell you what I thought about Christians. They're basically doormats, turn the other cheek people who let everybody walk all over them. And although at that point I was sure of the divinity of Christ because I had seen him, it wasn't somebody that I was willing to follow. Why? One, because I thought I was too rotten and dirty and too broken and too used and abused. Two, because I was never going to be the person to lay down and take it. I had already promised myself that never again will anybody ever abuse me. And I say that when in fact I did a lot of abuse of people. But it's a different kind of abuse, so I guess it was okay to me then. What can I tell you? The lies we all accept. But while I was going to this group, there was a guy who didn't appreciate anything I had to say and thought I was full of it. And he was not shy about telling me what he thought about me. And I told him why I wouldn't follow Jesus, and he said, I don't know what Jesus you're talking about. The Jesus I know and I worship turned tables. He made a whip. He called people you children of the devil, you children of the snake. He called them out on their self-righteous attitude that was full of it. I was like, whoa, I have never heard this before. If I had, it's never sunk in that way. And I started to look into it and talking to this guy and talking to other people, trying to find out if he's lying to me. Well, that guy has actually turned out to be my husband. He's sitting right there. Yeah. And I accepted Christ on November 1st of 2015. And at this point, still, my dad is trying to find me and kill me because he went to his local mosque shortly after we publicly left Islam and got what is called a fatwa on us. A fatwa is just a judgment, all right? It was a judgment on our lives for leaving Islam. So there's an active judgment on us. 5 days after I accepted Christ, and by the way, was no longer a smoker. If I have a beer or two, I am one happy little girl. And yeah, all of that money that went into training my liver, gone to waste. All right? So, and also I do dress modestly now as much as I can get to, but that's what I'm comfortable in. But 5 days after I accepted Christ, I made a little video that I posted on my Facebook with less than 100 people on it because somebody, actually, I think he was a Mormon, he posted something that the jihadists are hijacking Islam. I have some words that trigger me. Jihadists hijacking Islam is one of them. We worship the same God is another one. So I made this video about Muhammad and what Muhammad did and how Muhammad was a warlord and how Muhammad, he's the one that had people killed, and that the Quran is the one that commands the cutting at the necks, slay them wherever you find them, and that Muhammad did it first and Muhammad did it better than ISIS is doing it. And the video went viral. Facebook shut me down. But the video went viral, and there was something I did in a moment of anger. And then I had a talk with God because my husband had taught me to pray. I was like, okay, I think this is the point where I need to pray. I'm a baby Christian. Okay, God, this can't go viral because I'm in hiding and I don't want my dad to kill me. I'm already in trouble with the Muslims. I just want to have a peaceful life. Amen. Well, I heard back. Go and tell them the wonders I've done. I'm like, okay, pretty sure I'm supposed to be obedient. Yes, Lord, I'm going to do that. But can you consider what I just said? Please, Your Highness. That was not the situation. So since then, people have been calling for, radio shows, for internet shows, asking what I know about Islam. And of course, I share my testimony every single time. And when they don't ask about my testimony, it's gonna come up. I can't tell you that I'm a decent human being right now without telling you about Jesus Christ who made me this way. 3 years ago, if somebody talked to me about Muslims, my answer honestly was nuke 'em. That's what I always said, nuke 'em. Do them all a favor. And now, because of Christ and the work he's done in my life, I actually started a nonprofit organization called Free the Captive. It's a Luke 4:18 organization. And my goal is twofold, okay? One, to free Muslims from the captivity of Islam. Because I can tell you as a former Muslim, there is no worse slaveholder than Allah and Muhammad, okay? Being trapped in Islam is a horrendous life. The second thing is what I'm doing right now. freeing non-Muslims from the lies and the misinformation that Muslims and the left likes to push on them, because they're just prepping us to be dhimmis. All right, they're prepping us. Who is it? Glenn Beck, I think, that made the book Useful Idiots. I haven't read it, but useful dhimmis is what we have going on in the United States right now. People who are not Muslims, but who carry water and do everything possible to make sure that the Islamic agenda takes place. So John 8:36 is the motto of my life. If the Son sets you free, you'll be free indeed. And I can stand before you and say, I surely am free. And though I have a fatwa in my life, though I have Muslims calling for me to get killed, and I'll share it with you. We just recently had to sell our house and move over 1,500 miles because somebody posted our address online, and we had 2 break-ins into our house. And so we had to move. We could not stay. And so I could tell you that we are facing persecution here in the United States. Ex-Muslims are actually probably the second most persecuted group in the United States after infants that are not born yet. And so Psalms 23:4 fits my life perfectly. Now, let me tell you something. Let me tell you more about the wonders the Lord has done for me. Not only am I a Christian, not only do I relish in the freedom of Christianity, not only do I relish in the freedom of being an American, not only do I have a very healthy, beautiful marriage, broken every single cycle that the scientists and the psychologists told me I was supposed to be in. See, I was supposed to already be beat up again with another abusive man, but that's not the plan that Christ had for me. But I went to 3 different doctors in 2 states who told me it was impossible for me to get pregnant. There was too much scarring from the trauma of the abuse as a child. Your uterus is upside down or doing the splits. I don't know what it is. It wasn't going to happen, okay? That's Anna. She's 2 years old. She's our little miracle. Actually, 3 months after we got married, we found out we were pregnant. Yeah. I guess God doesn't really care about what the doctors say, does he? So a week after I found out I was pregnant, I was diagnosed with Lyme. And if anybody knows anything about Lyme, it can cause a deformity for the babies, it can cause stillbirths, it can cause a number of mental illnesses, and all the research I did said you should get an abortion because you're basically subjugating this baby to a life of misery with all of their illnesses that they're going to have. And I was so scared. I was so scared. But I held on to what I know to be true. So, staunchly pro-life, by the way. Ridiculously pro-life. Unapologetically pro-life. And my daughter was born. Thank you. And when my daughter was born, this girl has exceeded every standard they have, 10 toes, 10 fingers, with a great attitude, and a little bit of feistiness all mixed into it. And what's even best of all is that this girl, you can see Christ in her. Even at 2 years old, she is incredible with the joy that she has in her. We go to anywhere, and she just brings people all kinds of happiness. When she was in the womb, we would go into church, and we went to a Baptist church at the time, but when she was in the womb, I could feel her tumbling. I called her an alligator. When the worship was going on, I kid you not, every single time, she would just go nuts. And I was so thankful to God for that. And this is her. I hope this video will work. But this is her worshiping right here. And I have to tell you, if it doesn't work here, you can go to my Facebook page and look at it because I did post it. But I'm the person at church who's in the back and who, if I really feel the Spirit, I'm like, this. thank you. She was about 1.5 years in that video, and you can see the aisles. She's the only one in the aisles. She has not learned this from anybody at our church. And our church, I love them. Well, this was back home. They actually called her the Pentecost. She was the little Pentecost, and every single person said, I really want to get in there and dance with you. But they're Baptists, and that's only a power for the Pentecost to get into the aisles and do that. So I can honestly tell you that Christ has changed my life, and that being American has given me the opportunity to share this with you. Because if I try to go around the world to share this, I'm surely going to get killed. They're trying to kill me here. So I'm urging you to please stand with me, to please let my story be one of the last ex-Muslims that are getting persecuted here in the United States, and to not let the name of Jesus Christ be an offensive thing that'll lead us to go into prison. Don't let them shut me up. I don't know if you noticed, but I only used Islamic scriptures. I only used Islamic doctrine. I haven't called Muhammad one single name. Ilhan Omar, Keith Ellison, Rashida Tlaib, Hillary Clinton wants me to go to jail for making the presentation I just did, and for speaking to you again after we take a little bit of break. We're going to take a 5-minute break so you can stretch your legs a little bit, go to the bathroom if you need to. But they want me to go to jail for making this. I can go to jail in Canada. I can go to jail in England. Have you heard of Tommy Robbins? Yes. Yeah. He's been to jail several times simply for speaking the truth, simply for saying sex grooming gangs shouldn't be getting away with it. So here we are in Minnesota, and history is going to look back just like we look back on Germans and say, it makes me laugh sometimes when I hear some millennials go, oh man, if I was back when Hitler was, I would have kicked him, I would have done some stuff. I'm like, you understand that we have this happening right now to your neighbors? Well, I don't understand how people would stand for their neighbors getting abused. How do you stand for your Muslim neighbor getting abused at home? How do you stand for your Muslim neighbor girl getting married to a man who's much older, getting sold into marriage? It happens every single day. Every time I say this, people are like, where's your proof? Well, we aren't able to get them, but we're going to show you some examples of what happens. There was a girl actually in Texas just January of last year. She's 16 years old. She refused an arranged marriage. She's a Muslim girl. And her parents beat her and then threw boiling oil on her. Yeah, and she disappeared. And I was like, God, please let her be okay. Please, Lord. Texas, of all places. They did finally find her, and they took all of the rest of the kids out of the house. Now, let me tell you this. You say, oh yeah, they were rotten parents. Who do you think was going to marry her to the older guy? Their local mosque, next county over. This is all taking place. Wherever you find a mosque, understand that Islamic Sharia is alive and well, and it is taking place there. There are marriages, there are divorces, there are civil laws there are Islamic civil laws that are taking place and being practiced, and they don't care for the state, and they don't care for the federal government. So thank you very much for listening to me. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and when you come back, we're going to talk about Islam versus Christianity, and Islam and the American Constitution and the history there. And if you have to go home right now, please visit freethecaptive.org. We could use volunteers, we could use financial support. We can use your support in contacting your congressmen and your congresswomen. We are a nonprofit organization. We are not a 501c3 because we need a lawyer since we're evangelistic and we're also political. So if you know a good lawyer who would be willing to help us out for our never dying gratitude, we would really appreciate it. Thank you.
I just want to ask. We're just going to do a free will offering here for Ferris. So.
Thank you. All right. And why don't we do a raffle right now before if anybody has to leave? We'll do the raffle. Okay. How about the number 7? Oh, yay!